it's ends up being a little more comfortable and everything if I sit down. So if you all don't have a good view of this or of me, you can feel free to move. I won't be upset. So just to take a quick second to introduce myself and why I'm talking to you here. My name is Dr. Sean Hutchins, and I got my PhD in experimental psychology from McGill, and I've done a lot of work at University of Montreal and at the Rotman Research Institute before coming here as the director of research. My background is specifically in music cognition. I'm interested in how people understand music and what's going on in their minds to help them understand music. And so that's my background. So I've been here at the conservatory since full-time since April. But if you ever have any questions about anything about music and the mind, then I'm the person to ask. You can feel free to get in touch with me. But for today, I'm going to be telling you a little bit about cognitive skills and how they can come into play with arts education. So this is going to serve as kind of an introductory framing to some of the more specific lessons that we'll get later on in the course. So I'd like to start off with a brief introductory story here. And I'd like to talk just a little bit of a story about my morning a while ago and about a grocery list. So bear with me. I'm gonna be looking at a few notes here so I don't get any of the details wrong, but I'll try and tell this as well as I can. So it's the other morning, and waking up, I'm taking care of the kids and making breakfast for the family before work. My wife normally wakes up later than me, and she came upstairs as I was handing the kids the cereal in front of their TV. And the kids started asking me if they could watch another TV show after this one is done. And I tell them, no, we can't watch another TV show. My wife comes up, and she starts telling me to pick up some groceries on the way home from work for dinner, so we can have dinner tonight. And so I won't go through the whole list here, but for simplicity's sake, we're just going to call it a loaf of bread, a container of butter, a container of milk, and a stick of butter. Okay? So after work, I stop at the grocery store and find that they've completely changed the layout of this grocery store. So now I don't know what anything of this grocery store is. I find the bread okay, but the dairy aisle has been 100% rearranged, and I'm looking for the type of butter that we normally get. Can't find it at all. So finally I decided, you know what? I'm just going to take a step back, take it all in from a broad level, and there, over at the bottom, way over on the side, I can see these yellow rectangles. I'm like, aha! There's the butter. So I finally figure out where the butter is. I get in and I'm just about to turn to look for the milk when all of a sudden I get a phone call from my wife. And so she said that she's really sorry. She had an important work call that she had to take, and could I pick up the kids? So I look at my watch, and of course she's calling me late, and there's only 15 minutes left before the daycare closes. So I don't bother searching for the milk. I just take what I've got, go check out, get in the car, and go to the daycare and pick up the kids. I get there just in time to avoid some of the extra late fees, but not quite early enough to avoid some rather brusque looks from the daycare staff. But it's okay. Anyway, after I get the kids, I have to stop for gas. And I stop for gas, and I realize, oh, you know what? I can get milk here too. So I pick up the milk, come home, and I walk through the door, and I've got a big smile on because I managed to get the kids and get the groceries and come home and get everything ready for dinner. And my wife comes on, she gives me a little kiss on the cheek and says, "That's great, honey, thanks for getting all of that, but looks like I'm going to have a lot of extra work to do tonight, so can we just order pizza?" So we had pizza that night. Anyway, I go through this long story because to do everything that I had to do these rather mundane tasks, I needed to use a lot of different cognitive skills. And when I'm talking about cognitive skills here, I'm talking about ways of using your mind and ways of using what's going on there that underlie some of the simple and the complex actions in daily life. I'm not talking about knowledge content. I'm not talking about knowing this or knowing that. I'm talking about ways of using the mind that support all of these actions. Now, when you hear cognitive, that's a big fancy word, but really it just means thinking. And it doesn't have to be about things that are overly complex. It doesn't have to be about things that are really difficult. It can be, these cognitive skills are really at the heart of even some of the most simple things that we're doing for life. And so these act as the foundations for knowledge. If you've ever heard the term executive function, I'm just going to throw that word out now. This is a buzzword that's going around that people like to use, especially in psychology, but in a lot of other things. All of these cognitive skills here, that's executive function is another name for certain sets of these cognitive skills. So you can keep that in mind as I go through this. And these cognitive skills that I'm going to talk about are really going to be things that provide the basis for knowledge, not just for adults either, but even for children. They're going to be, because they're these foundations for kids, that's why they're so important, and that's why I'm talking about them now. So, without further ado, I'll introduce these 4 major cognitive skills that we're going to be talking about here. And so these 4 skills are attention, memory, perception, and one that's slightly more amorphous, cognitive flexibility. You can actually see them written up there as well, in case you forget. But I'll go through each of these different types of things in a little bit more depth, so you have a good idea about what I'm talking about when I'm talking about cognitive skills here. So, for attention, I like to go back to the psychologist's favorite writer, William James, because he puts all of these things incredibly clearly, and it ends up being hard to improve on his definitions. But back in 1890, he wrote about attention. He called attention as, he said that attention is the taking possession by the mind in clear and vivid form of one out of what seems several simultaneously possible objects or trains of thought. And as well, that attention implies withdrawal from some things in order to deal effectively with others. So generally, what you can get a sense here is that when we're talking about attention, we're talking about a mental process of concentrating on something. And that something can be a mental item, it can be a physical item, just so long as that's what the mind is focusing on. Now, in order to focus your mind on something, it's not just a process of seeing the object and focusing on that. You also, as a complementary process, need to be ignoring all of the many other things that are simultaneously vying for your attention. I'm sure you all can relate to that feeling. But in order to focus on one thing, it's not just enhancing the one thing you want to draw into your mind, but it's also damping down your attention to everything else that's there. And this attention here is this gateway to consciousness. So things don't really get into your conscious mind without going through your attention at some point or another. If you recall the story of the grocery list there, back when my wife was interrupting me when I was trying to feed the kids, I realized that I had to shift my attention from taking care of the kids and maybe telling them and trying to tamp down on their TV watching to paying attention to this new thing, the grocery list that was coming in. That's what I had to focus my mind on. So even there, I'm using this cognitive skill in order to support this behavior. Now, a little bit more detail about attention. As you all know, attention is limited in capacity. We can only pay attention to a few things at once. If you want to do it very well, only one, but you can pay attention to multiple things at once. It is possible. Attention can be more or less automatic to things. If you're doing something that you know extremely well, you actually don't need to pay attention to what you're doing quite as much. You can let your mind wander to other things while you're doing something. So for example, a very good example is driving a car. If you're driving to work every day, you really don't need to pay too much attention to what's going on. You can listen to music, you can listen to something else. If you're driving to an unfamiliar place that you've never been before, you really need to pay attention to where you're going. It requires a lot of mental energy because it's not as automatic of a process. Now, this process of attention can be both internally and externally driven. That is, you can direct what your attention goes towards through a conscious process of selecting what you want to pay attention to. But in addition, there can be objects in the outside that can naturally draw your attention. So, for example, if you're having a conversation, if Angela and I here are talking, we're discussing whatever Angela and I talk about, probably hockey or something. And all of a sudden, I hear my name off in the distance. My attention is going to be naturally drawn to that. It's very hard to actually ignore your name when it comes up. Another thing that really naturally draws attention is swears or profanity. If you hear that, those get your attention all right, especially when they're your kids experimenting with those words. They get your attention. As an example of an internal thing, if you've ever had something that a bad memory that comes up, that can really draw your attention to that internal memory of what's going on. It can really lead you there, even if you don't want to be thinking about that.
It's something like it happens and triggers you?
No, even just thinking about it. Like,
yeah.
Oh man, I really shouldn't have said that thing today. That was dumb, It draws your attention, even when you don't want it to, even when you're done thinking about it, Sometimes you're not done thinking about it. And to use a more musical example, if you're hearing a song and there's a wrong note in the middle of it, that'll draw your attention pretty quick, especially depending on the wrong note. But the point is that there are things both good and bad, both internal and external, that can draw your attention away from things. And you can also choose where to put your attention. So attention is both internally and externally driven. So in everyday life, this attention can come up and you can run up to the limits of attention in a lot of different circumstances. You use your attention when you're doing things like if you're at a large cocktail party and you're trying to pay attention to somebody nearby. But you might also be thinking about what you want to say next, and you might also be trying to hear what the song is that's playing in the background. You might also be subtly trying to overhear what the next people are talking about. You might also trying to be keeping an eye on maybe a person of interest across the room as well. There's a lot of things that can be demanding of your attention in that kind of environment. Or if you're keeping track of your kids in a crowded playground, they can run around really fast and you have to keep your attention all over. Or if you're listening to boring scientists give lectures about cognitive skills, sometimes it can be a challenge to keep your attention. Or even if you're just on the subway and you're playing a game on your phone, that can be very attention demanding. I've seen people miss their stops for focusing too much on what seem to be very silly games on their phones.
I guess that's what distracted driving is all about.
Yes.
Because you're texting or a phone call,
Yes.
is taking your attention.
Yes, it can be those limits of attention can be very very strong, and they can have very dire consequences in some cases.
And today when we all assembled, Nicole was trying to catch my attention and tell me something, but I really couldn't focus because this music was on, that music was on, people were talking, and I just couldn't get her words.
So this is attention. You can all see it's a natural thing to think about, but there are some less obvious facets to it once you start going in depth. So let's turn from attention, and now we'll focus our attention on memory.
Right from plants.
So,
And Sean, I'm really appreciating all of these notes that you compiled. Will you be able to give those to us in a PDF?
I can make it available later, yes. So, memory is, again, another very simple and obvious concept, but to state it as clearly and definitively as I can, memory is keeping information in your consciousness after it is no longer present there in front of you. So if there's something that you want, information that you need, and then it's gone, if you want to keep it in your consciousness, you need to remember it. That's essentially what memory is. And so memory can have a lot of different facets to it. You can remember specific events. You can remember what I ate for breakfast this morning. You can remember that. You can remember, instead of specific events, you can remember general knowledge. Things like Paris is the capital of France. It's a slightly different aspect of memory. You can also remember how to do something, like riding a bike. That's another a very important thing about aspect of memory. So in addition to thinking about what we remember, we can also think about a couple of different time frames for memory. And psychologists like to break memory down into two primary time frames here. There's short-term memory and long-term memory. And they're not quite, the names are very intuitive, but they're not quite exactly what we naturally think of when we think of short-term and long-term memory. Short-term memory refers to remembering something that has never left your conscious mind. If you're continually aware of something, it's still in your short-term memory. So this would be something like repeating a phone number over and over and over until you actually dial it. If I get a phone number that I need to remember, you can keep repeating it over and over, and if it goes out of your mind, it might never come back. So that's keeping it in short-term memory. Long-term memory is in fact just past short-term memory. So it's remembering something that at some point has left your consciousness. Even if it's only been for a few minutes, if it comes back, it has gone into your long-term memory. That doesn't mean that you will remember it forever, but that's what we think of when we think of long-term memory. Things that completely leave your consciousness and then come back into them. So it's the act of remembering from long-term memory is really digging up from your mind's storage right there, as opposed to something that's just always been there, present in your mind at least. So things like long-term memory can be things like remembering the name of your high school music teacher, or it could be something as recent as who said that quote about attention 4 slides ago. Yes, very good. So that's an example of long-term memory there, unless you've been repeating William James over and over and over, in which case, see me after class. But in the story that I opened with, obviously, remembering the specific grocery list is committing that at first to short-term memory by repeating it over and over and over again, and then, once I'm sure that I have it, to a long-term memory, and then recalling that from long-term memory when it's actually time to use that memory and collect those items at the grocery store. Okay?
So repeating a phone number over and over again, just so to keep it in your head. But if you memorize that phone number because you dialed it so many times, then it becomes long-term.
Exactly. Like if I remember 203-342-2406, that's my childhood phone number.
Right.
You know, that's something that I have used over and over and over again, and through the act of repeating it and continual use, it becomes so ingrained that, you know, barring a major head injury, will probably never leave me. So that's
and you remember yours.
Of course, they were shorter.
Yeah.
They didn't have area codes.
they did have phones though, right?
Yeah, they had phones. And we didn't have to talk to the operator to make a call.
I'm wondering about a musical example. So if the teacher sings, "Welcome, Sean," we all sing, "Welcome, Sean." That name is in my short-term memory. But then if I come back to you later in the class and I don't remember your name, then it hasn't sunk into my long-term memory.
But 3 weeks later, it
Yeah.
might be deeply embedded, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and through using it over and over again, you can what's called consolidate that memory. We'll talk more and more about different aspects of memory in the when we delve into that topic in detail. But this is just to give you an overview of what we're talking about when we talk about memory from a psychological standpoint here. Yeah. Okay, so I'll continue going to the next one. So the next process here is perception. And perception is very important. It's actually the precursor to any of these other cognitive processes. It happens before attention, before memory. And when I talk about perception, I'm not talking about just seeing something or just hearing something. I'm talking about a mental ordering of the world that gives that seeing and hearing a coherent shape and a coherent pattern. It's not just a bumbling, buzzing, blooming, and confusion. It's actually having a sense there made of the world as it's coming in. That's what we think of when we think of perception. So this involves finding patterns in what you're seeing and what you're hearing and what's going on. It involves something as simple as recognizing objects. In my case, it's stepping back and finding the yellow rectangle and finding that butter in the store. So let me give you, to help make this concrete, let me give you an example of seeing versus perceiving. So raise your hand when you perceive it. Perceive it. Let me help you. There's a dog. See the dog now? And as soon as you see the dog, now you can't look at that without actually making sense of it. Your mind has the pattern, it has the order, and now you actually perceive what's going on there. It's not just a random spate of dots, it's a picture with a structure, and there's more to it than just which dots are where. There's actually the whole narrative behind that picture suddenly in front of you because you have the pattern and you have a mental template to put down on what's going on there. Okay? So that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about perception. It's not just seeing, it's not just hearing, it's making sense of what you're seeing and hearing. Yeah?
Where is the dog?
Yeah, I don't see it.
There's his dog's head.
See, Sniffy.
And the leg.
He's a Doberman. He's
He's a Dalmatian.
It's a Dalmatian.
Yeah, I thought the back, the first part that showed, I thought that those were
See,
the
there's his
hind
ear, he's sniffing on the ground.
legs.
Yeah.
Looks like a tree. He's on fluff as well.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Okay.
So he's got his nose to the ground,
Yeah.
he's got a black ear.
His left hind leg is kind of not there, right?
Yeah, you can't really make too
Yeah.
much of the left leg.
Yeah.
But the easiest is to see the
Yeah.
ear right there,
Yeah.
and that's the mouth,
Yeah.
and that's the rest of the head and neck right there.
I don't think whatever about that.
Yeah.
See, I noticed one right away, but usually I'm really bad at these.
It takes a while, but once you know what you're looking for, then it
Right.
becomes very easy to see. So that's what I'm talking about. I'll give you a little bit of an easier one next, because you can probably make out the face here. Our perception, when we're perceiving this order in the world, it's based on our prior knowledge of what's going on there. So if I point out the dog, then it becomes easier to see. But it's also based on things like natural tendencies as well as the actual features there. So, for example, we have a natural tendency when seeing a figure like this to see this as two lines, one curvy and one straight, and not to parse it as one line going like this and another line going like this. That's not a natural way of parsing this. We have our own natural biases of how to see objects like this. Likewise, the actual features of an object can make a particular object stand out. You will probably notice that at least one of these things doesn't belong. And if you have a reasonably good color vision, you also might notice that one of the objects is not the same color as the rest as well. These are the actual features of what's going on here helps us to see both the pattern and the deviations in that pattern as well. By the way, if you go online and do a Google search for faces in things, you can find a lot of really good examples of this. This is my favorite, but there are some very good ones. Okay, so we'll turn to the last of these cognitive skills, which is cognitive flexibility. And again, this is the most amorphous and ill-defined of these, but it also might be one of the more important ones as well. When I talk about cognitive flexibility, I'm talking about the ability to change the way that we think about something. And so this can include the ability to take advantage of new circumstances. It can be avoiding getting stuck in a rut, and this is a process which is crucial to creative thought. In addition, this ability to change the way we think about something is the same kind of skill that underlies us being able to take another person's perspective on something. So it's got a very strong link to this social interpersonal aspect of what's going on of our lives as well. If you go back to the opening story, when I had to suddenly switch from picking up groceries to picking up the kids, that's an example of changing my mindset right away and realizing that the gas station is not just a place to get gas, but also thinking about a gas station as a place where you can get milk is another example of cognitive flexibility here. This is just an example of using that skill in everyday life. Yes?
Is it associated with intelligence? Because
That's-
one of the definition of intelligence is to be able to adapt to the new environment, right? It's behavioral.
Yeah, well, intelligence, yes. So let me finish explaining cognitive flexibility here, but as soon as I finish that, I do want to touch on how this relates to intelligence here. Okay? Is that okay with you? And I think that'll help get the right frame of mind for thinking about how intelligence fits in all of this here. So, in our modern life, we need to be able to drop one idea that isn't working and switch to something else. We need to it's